Hey guys, welcome back. It's Joel from Reboot Studios, and we're back with another episode of the Survival Island game. Now, I know it's been quite a while since the last one, but we've actually been up to some big things at Reboot Studios. You'll hear more about it in the next few videos we make. But without further ado, let's get to it. Last episode, we created our health, water, and food bar, a little heads-up display for the player, and we said that we would code the heads-up display in this episode, so we're going to do that today. So I've just created a scripts folder here, just so we can keep our project nice and clean, and if we go into this, we're going to create a new C# script. Now we're going to call this one health, food, water, because that's what it's going to be doing, managing the health, food, and water. And we're going to attach this script to our first person controller that we created. We're going to be doing that by adding a component, and then we'll just search for health, food, water that we've just created, this here, and we just add that as a component. Now, if you guys remember, in our assets, prefabs, we actually saved the FPS controller in here. So if you look on here, this version of our FPS controller doesn't have the script attached. If we go into our hierarchy, the script is attached. So we're going to need to apply this to our prefabs folder. And the way that we're going to do that is we'll go up to here, go overrides, and click apply all. And that will basically just override this one so that health, food, and water is in every single instantiation of our FPS controller. So, without further ado, let's open it up. So, in the first episode, I did mention that there's not going to be too much advanced programming, and I'm going to try my best to keep it as simple as possible. If you have no C# experience, that's alright, just try and follow along as best you can. So we're going to start by adding a couple of floats. Now, floats are just decimal point numbers. It's a variable that holds a decimal point value, basically. So you don't need to know too much about this, but you'll see as we go along and you'll get better at it naturally, so don't worry. So float food equals 100, float health equals 100, and float water equals 100. Now this isn't necessarily linked to our sliders yet, but we will do that in the script. So we want to make these sort of what we're going to edit throughout our code, the food, health, and water values, and we just want that to be represented by these three sliders. So in order to connect the sliders to these variables, we're going to need to have a reference to these sliders in our code. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to start by adding Unity engine.ui. Now this is just basically giving us access to the components of our canvas here. So if we go to health, we have this little slider component, and if we go water and food, it's the same. And if you notice, this value here on the slider is what's actually changing it. So what we could do is say public game object food slider, and if I say that and come over to Unity, you'll see that, just give it a second, yep, you'll see in here, food slider is now under our script. So now we could add this game object into there, and it would reference that. So if we said food slider in any of our functions here, it would be talking about whatever we've put into it in here. So we don't necessarily need the game object, as I was saying. We just need this slider component of the object. So the easier thing to do would be to change this game object to slider. So we'll say food slider, public slider, water slider, and public slider, health slider. And here we go. It does say type mismatch just because I've added a game object before, but if we just drag food, you see it's the same thing. It's adding this food, but it's not necessarily adding all of it, including the transform. It's just adding this slider component. And that's why, if you look at it, it says slider in brackets. So we'll put water and lastly health. And there we go. So now we've got food, water, and health sliders. And they're ready to be referenced in here. So our next step would be to update the values of these sliders with whatever these floats are. So we're going to create a function. And if you don't know what this means, don't worry too much. It's basically just an easier way of sorting out your code if you use a void function. So void update sliders, call it that. And we'll use these curly brackets. So whatever is in update sliders will be within these curly brackets. And we could call that from any other function in our script. So this update is called once per frame. So it's called, whatever your frames per second are, it'll be called that many times per second. So void update, we want to call update sliders. That way, at all times, our sliders are going to be updated to these values right here. So we're calling this function, and then it's as if everything in this curly brackets is in here. So we'll come over to this one, and what we're going to do is we're going to go food slider dot value, and the reason why we're saying dot value is because we're going food slider, and we're going to this value part of it here. So this will be between 0 and 1, representing whatever our food's at. So we'll go here, food slider dot value equals food. Now if we just say food like this, what it's going to do is it's going to set this value, which is supposed to be between 0 and 1, it's going to set it to 100, which we obviously don't want. So we're going to divide by 100. So it's equal to food divided by 100. So now when food is maximum, which is 100 on here, it'll be 1. And if it's 90 on here, it'll be 0.9. So that's what we want. Now we're going to do that for all of our sliders. And there we go. So now, just to test it, if I set my food to 80, and then I start our program here, you can see that the food slider goes down to 80%. So that's exactly what we want. I'll obviously make it 100 for now, just to keep it that way. So if you guys want to tinker with that a little bit, change it around, make sure everything's working, you're free to do that. The next step that we want this script to do is to drain the water and the food like it would in any normal survival game. The water would go down naturally until you drink something, and if you don't and it gets to 0, then it'll start, draining your health until you die. So we just want to create another function in update. Now we want to do it before update sliders, because every frame we really want to change our food value, our health value, our water value, and then we want to update it at the end to the graphical interface. So what we're going to call this function is, let's just call it food water drain. Now I actually recommend that you guys choose different names for your variables, different names for your functions, because it sort of gets you better at coding if you can remember and not just copy exactly from the video. The issue that we're facing now is we don't know how much to drain the food or how much to drain the water. Now the best way I think to do this is to make a variable called, food drain rate, water drain rate. So here I've just set it up so the water is going to drain just twice as quick as the food, which I think is a fair thing to do in a survival game. You kind of want if you think you need to drink more than you need to eat. So yeah, we'll do that for now. I've made them public so that obviously, just like the sliders, we can actually edit them on the fly. If we are playing the game or whatever we're doing, we could always just come in here and change the drain rate if we want to play around with it a little bit if it's too fast or anything like that. So in food water drain, we want to say water, we'll start with food minus equals food drain rate, and water minus equals water drain rate. This is just gonna, it's just gonna subtract food drain rate from food every single frame, which obviously if you're running at 200 frames per second is going to be far too fast. It's going to basically in half a second it'll wipe out all our food and all our water. So we don't really want that. The way that we sort of get around that while still doing it every frame is we multiply it by this thing in Unity called time.delta time. Now this one's a little bit hard to explain, but essentially it makes it the same no matter what frame rate you're at. So time.delta time is sort of the amount of time between each frame. So it's basically taking into account whatever your frame rate is, and it'll go the same rate no matter what your frame rate is. So otherwise, if someone had a really, really fast computer, it would drain their food a lot faster than someone that has a real slow laptop. So we're going to multiply both the drain rates by time.delta time. And then it should just drain every frame from then on. So if we want to have a look, give it a little test. You can see that as I'm playing, the water is draining. It's draining twice as fast as the food. If I turn down the water drain rate, you can see that it slows down. And if I speed up the food drain rate, you can see that the food speeds up. So that's exactly what we want. But as you can see, as it gets to 0, nothing happens. So the next step will be to drain our health when food or water gets to 0. So the way we're going to do that is we're just going to use our food water drain function that we created. And after we drain that frame worth of food or water, we're going to check if the food or water is below or equal to 0. So how we're going to do that is we'll say if food is below or equal to 0, then we want the health to drain. We should actually say if food is below or equal to 0, or, which is these 2 lines, this is some C#, 2 lines means or, 2 and symbols means and. So just put 2 lines. If food is below or equal to 0, or water is below or equal to 0. So if either of them have passed beyond 0, then we want the health to start draining. So we'll say health minus equals, say health drain rate, which we haven't created yet, but we will, and time.delta time. And I'm not going to make this one public just because we shouldn't really need to change it. It's not going to happen often. It's only when they're starving or they're extremely thirsty that the health has to go down. So we're not going to change it too much, but let's just make it 5. So as you can see, as the water reaches 0, obviously we haven't set it up that if our health equals 0, anything happens yet, but that's for next episode. Thanks for watching this episode of the survival game series. Next one, we'll be looking a little bit deeper into the code, and we will be making it so it is possible to die, and we'll be fixing up our drain rates and things like that, and really starting to move on to the rest of the heads-up display before we start, adding weapons and fine-tuning the movement and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'm very excited to continue, as you can probably tell, and I'll see you in the next video.